Welcome to the Bayside SF Giants talk show. I am Mark DeLucchi. That is Kerry Crowley. And we're back after the trade deadline to talk about, the the three moves the Giants made. Nothing earth shattering. I guess four if we count the Mike Bauman trade. Don't forget. Um,
Don't forget.
don't forget. No, the three moves the Giants made. Talk about, where they're at. Obviously, it's been a little bit, but frankly, the unfortunate beauty of talking about this Giants team is whether we're away for a week or four, they played about 500 baseball, maybe a little bit less. And that's been the last few weeks for the Giants. There's been some highlights, there's been some lowlights. I think, unfortunately for fans, that means there's a lot of frustration with the team, right? Because the times when it looks like, oh, they're finally about to turn a corner. Obviously, right before the trade deadline, they sweep the Rockies in the 4-game series, the rotation, the vision is finally coming into fruition, but also the offense remains frustrating. The bullpen has remained inconsistent, and while I think on paper the bullpen continues to look strong, you have a lot of pitchers who, perhaps because of just heavy workloads, not just this season but over the previous couple of seasons, aren't pitching up to, I think, what fan expectations have been, which has made the bullpen less trustworthy than I think and many others expect. And so that's how we get here on August 2nd as we're talking, Kerry. But what are your feelings about the Giants now coming out of the trade deadline, looking down this final stretch, or I guess these last 50 so games?
Yeah, I think it was interesting going into the All-Star break. The Giants essentially set themselves up for a no-win situation headed into the trade deadline. And what I mean by that is like the Giants needed to go like 9-2 to really convince you in those 11 games that they should be a buyer. And if they went 4-7, you still probably weren't all the way in on selling. And they were what, somewhere in the middle, 6-5, something like that. And so you come out of that situation and you look at the trade deadline, and there was no real path, in my opinion, to take bold, aggressive action, which is what Giants fans have been waiting for the last 3 years. Giants fans kind of thought the organization was doing last offseason when they go out and they sign
Yep.
Jung Hoo Lee, the 6 year deal, when they go out and get Jorge Soler, Matt Chapman, and Blake Snell. The issue is those bold, aggressive moves didn't translate to the field through the first 110 games of the season. So they sit here today, 54-56, starting the 7 game road trip. And I think people either wanted them to have a 2 feet in, jump right in approach at the trade deadline where they were buyers, where they were going to contend in the National League, or the 2 feet out where, hey, we're selling and we're giving up Blake Snell. We're seeing what we can get for pretty much anyone on the roster. Maybe Camilo Doval comes up in trade talks. And yet the Giants land themselves in this situation where probably wasn't prudent to do either of those things. And because of that, you've got a fan base that is understandably disappointed and frustrated because it feels like so much more of the same of what everyone has witnessed in 2022, 2023, and even other trade deadlines under Farhan Zaidi. 2019, when they had the opportunity to potentially go bold with Madison Bumgarner and Will Smith. 2020, when they were kind of in that mix in the extended wild card and they didn't add to the squad. So I think it was just a no-win situation for anyone. And no matter what happened, regardless of the names that were moved or not moved, brought in, not brought in, people were going to feel relatively disappointed about it. And I think we saw that coming.
Yeah, I think it comes down to, a huge part of it too, right? Is the Giants were a team that was built to not be the full version of themselves on opening day, right? And so again, like, even from day one, as we've talked about a lot, like, clearly the plan was to tread water, maybe overexceed, but those part, like, tread water until the rotation. You got reinforcements, you got some veterans in there that really propelled things, and partially because of Alex Cobb's in rehab delays, partially just the nature of Blake Snell obviously having a slow start compounded with some injuries. But nevertheless,
Mhm.
before the trade deadline, you basically got a week of that. And so as a fan, I think there was, I've been someone who I think has been pretty consistently an advocate on the buy side of things with the deadline, or at the very least
Yeah.
not selling.
Yeah.
And part of that is from the perspective of, like, I want to see the team. I want to see, like, you actually have a chance to see something closer to the team you built, at least on the pitching side. Um, and then on the flip side, if for I understand why folks would say the Giants need to sell. They a below 500 team. They've been roughly a 500 team for 2.5 years. The mediocrity is frustrating. And I think part of the reason I think like selling and rebuilds are so appealing to fan bases, I think why they've been such a successful, honestly, marketing ploy
Yeah,
is because like mediocrity is frustrating. And what tear downs and fire sales are selling you is, hey, you don't even have to worry about the wins and losses this season. Don't even get upset about it. And then in some hypothetical future will be 100-win juggernaut and you'll never have to worry about this again, right? And again,
yeah,
I would implore you as fans to look into how often that actually happens, and often you just get bad years and then they're back in mediocrity, or the Chicago White Sox, I think, are the horror story example, but nonetheless one, right? The White Sox tore down a team that had Chris Sale, Jose Quintana, right? Adam Eaton, Lucas, or I guess the Giolito was who they got back in that deal. Again, basically from that, like as of last year, Chris Sale and Quintana were still better than any pitcher they had acquired. Obviously, the Adam Eaton trade worked out better for them because Eaton didn't pan out. But nevertheless, like there are, you know, anyway, I say that to say, despite my personal feelings about that, I understand the appeal of those
yeah,
things.
yeah.
And I also think, I don't think this is a small part of it. I'd see no world where the Giants fire sale at this deadline and Farhan Zaidi is running baseball operations in November.
Exactly.
The Giants spent a lot in the offseason. If the Giants had fire sold, in my opinion, that would have been a clear thing that ownership had come in. They told Zaidi, hey, we want to either get below the luxury tax. We don't believe in this team. We don't believe in this vision. Get many prospects for as many pieces as you can, which is a clear sign you want a clean slate to hire someone new, right?
Exactly.
Which again, I think I remain more agnostic on Zaidi at this point. I still think there are pros and cons to his tenure. I see some levels of his vision. I see some level of his weak drawbacks. But I understand a fan saying I want someone new in here as well.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, that's how we get here. So let's talk about the moves themselves. Obviously, nothing. At least it seems like none are going to be too impactful, at least on paper. Now, again, that's what my dad said about Marco Scutero for Charlie Culberson. So you never know. But let's start on the sale side of things. I think the what I would describe as just the salary dump moves, right? The Giants traded Alex Cobb to the Guardians for, I believe, Jacob Bresnahan, I want to say, a left-handed
Yeah.
pitching prospect, high schooler who was drafted last year, had a solid year at the Complex League, but, a fun prospect, nothing to get excited about unless you really love digging into the minor leagues, and a player to be named later. And then they traded Jorge Soler and Luke Jackson to the Atlanta for Tyler Matzek and another player to be named
Setting
later.
Caballero or something.
Oh, that's
I
right.
think.
Yeah. That's right. A corner infielder. Is it an Oregon alum with some pop who hasn't necessarily showed some power in college, hasn't played to the same degree at this point in the minors, although he did homer in his first game at Eugene
Yeah.
back home. But yeah, I guess let's start with, what do you make of? I will also add Matt Sek is ostensibly out for the season with an injury, making $1.9 million. It seems like just mostly a salary offset. There is a club option for next year, but it's $5.5 million, and I find it hard to believe the Giants are planning to exercise that option. I could see a world where maybe if they do actually like Matt Sek, I could see a world where maybe they like decline the option and re-sign him for like 1 year, 2 million. You take advantage of this like incumbent period. But Matzek seems like salary offset more than anything else. But anyway, what were your reactions to those two moves? How do you feel about those fits?
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't quite understand the moves. If Farhan Zaidi comes out on Tuesday and speaks to reporters and says, we have the best rotation in baseball, we think we can go on a little bit of a run here. And then on Thursday, hops on with Tolbert and Copes on KNBR and essentially doubles down on that and says, we kind of need our pitching staff to carry us. The lineup is a big question right now. And they removed a piece from the lineup where Jorge Soler in the month of June had an 845 OPS. In the
Yep.
month of July, he had an 854 OPS. Did anyone love Jorge Soler as a leadoff hitter? Not really. But the OBP in the leadoff spot was like 380. It was
Yep.
very high as a leadoff hitter. I, of course, wanted him to be a cleanup guy for the Giants. I think that that's the natural fit when you've got a guy with that much pop. But your lineup is a huge question mark, and you're taking out someone this year who was on the right trajectory. Like, say what you want about April and May and Jorge Soler's lack of production, he'd kind of figured it out to the point where he was a productive piece for the Giants, and it's a salary dump. It's all it is. And so it's hard for me to listen to those comments and say, okay, you think that you can make a run and square that with dumping one of your 4 or 5 best hitters in a move where you're not getting major league talent in return. And I guess the same is kind of true of Alex Cobb in that, like, the Giants aren't getting someone in Bresnahan who's going to contribute anytime within the next 2, 3 seasons, and they're lucky if he'll ever make it to the major league level. And so I think with Alex Cobb, he was simply insurance. He
Mhm.
obviously has not thrown an inning this season, and the Guardians are taking on that payroll. That's good for the Giants. If financial flexibility is something that you care about, for me, obviously, I spend the Johnsons' money like it's my
Yeah, I was
own.
gonna say good for the
Like it's not
Johnsons,
my
whether it's
own,
good for the
actually.
Giants,
Yeah, exactly. So I'm saying, spend as much money as humanly possible every single season. And when you've got Kyle Harrison and Hayden Birdsong,
Yeah,
we're past innings thresholds,
yeah.
and you're, essentially saying these two guys are going to carry us into October, into August and September, and then potentially October.
Hypothetically, yeah.
Doesn't add up at all.
Yeah.
You've already hit that threshold with Jordan Hicks. There's no one at AAA who you're looking at and saying, well, he's going to come up and help us right now. Like, Keaton Wynn's out for the season.
Mhm.
Mason Black isn't walking through that door and giving you 6 shutout innings on any given night like you might be able to expect from Alex Cobb if
Right.
he came back fully healthy and ready to go. So for the Giants to come out and publicly say, hey, we still think we can do this while actively weakening their roster, I think fans have a right to be frustrated about that.
Yeah, no, I think that's well said. I think this is here's how would I put this? Neither of these moves, I think, really heavily impact the at least I should say the versions of these players I would expect to get down this final stretch. I do not think either of these moves necessarily really impact the Giants' upside plays. And I realize there's a few scenarios, right? Cobb could be a savior if Blake Snell goes down or something like that. Soler could obviously get hot, hit 15 homers in a 50-game stretch. But given the Soler we've seen, given the injuries Cobb is coming off of, what to me these moves are, and it's why I tend to agree. I'm not necessarily a big fan of them from the outside fan perspective. Is what they really do is they increase the downside risk, right? The Giants rotation is now one injury away from you're probably forcing Hicks back into the rotation, which isn't the worst case scenario in the world. But again, you're stretching him thin. And also, to be fair, Hicks maybe moving to the pen is a way to shore up some of the things we've been talking about that some guys getting
Yeah.
overused too, right? Like, um, and so, yeah, like again, Cobb was a little bit of an expensive insurance policy, but hey, it's not my money. Um, and with Soler, look, over the last year and a half, he's the best bat the Giants have in the organization. Like
Yeah.
obviously this year is not as good as last year, but over the last year and a half, he's by far been the best hitter. The Giants essentially traded you could argue Matt Chapman is a more proven hitter, but if you look at the last 3 years, I think there's a case to be made Soler is the most proven hitter on this team at this point. And so,
Yeah.
either way, they traded like one of their two or three most, right? And so that's tough if you want to be competing. Now, obviously, we're kind of underselling a little bit in the sense of Cobb opens up the spot for Hayden Birdsong, as you mentioned, who has looked electrifying and is someone I'm excited to watch. And trading Soler makes it much easier to get Marco Luciano into this lineup every day. We've had many discussions about Luciano's defensive future. I remain more bullish on them than I think most Giants fans are. That said, I agree that the easiest way to get him into the lineup right now is probably just to let him DH and practice defense on his own times, but not have to stress about it and feel the pressures of it in what you are hoping is a wild card race, or at the very least, his most prolonged stint in the big leagues. But again, like if Luciano and Matos are 26 or 27, I would feel these moves. I would feel like I would be, I think, more in favor of the Soler move than I am because,
Yeah.
I think about like this was my frustration. At times, I think this was the Evans era, but there were it was a repeat of things that happened at the Sabian era where I'll think about like how many years was Jarrett Parker or Mac Williamson at AAA and the Giants still didn't know what they had, right?
Yeah.
And, again, it ended up really costing them with Adam Duvall because they didn't really give him a prolonged look, and obviously they missed something big there. Um, But the thing about those were college guys who were already in their mid approaching late 20s, right? I'd feel the Giants clearly are very confident in David VR, and this is not about clearing roster. But if the Giants felt like they wanted to give David VR some run, I would be sort of more open to the Soler move simply because if Luciano is terrible these last 2 months, I still don't want to DFA him this offseason, probably.
Yeah.
Like he's going to be 23. We just saw with Elliot Ramos, right? A dude who the Giants were patient with, probably even despite their own frustrations and misgivings and lack of optimism. And look how that's paid off for them. I Again, injury also Jorge Soler has been injured a lot, perhaps one reason to trade him, but when you can, but also like opportunities tend to find young players. You don't need to force the issue. I think on these things, and I think when teams, with rare exceptions, right, like Benji Molina for Buster Posey, because you're not going to carry two catchers on the roster, things like that. Like with rare exceptions, I feel like when teams are saying we traded this veteran to clear a spot for the young guy, either that is because of sort of a clubhouse dynamic they're concerned about, or just money saving, right? Like, well, this guy we think can do something close to it similarly, right? And this was clearly money saving. I think it would not shock me if these are moves that ownership is talking to his idea, going, hey, this isn't what we expected for this season. Attendance is up a bit, but we don't know how it's going to go down the tail end here. Our attendance is also up in part because we're in the summer still and haven't necessarily hit some leaner months if we're out of contention in 3 weeks. Yeah. We why shouldn't we just get rid of Snell? What if he gets an UCL tear? We're paying him $30 million next year. And I think I could see a world where Zaidi's saying, look, the rotation is coming into form. I really believe in what this can be. If I find a way to cut 7 to 10 million this year, cut 10 to plus million off next year's books, does that give me the flexibility? Like, this feels like a mediated deadline that comes from a front office exec who is not in a great position of leverage. I think
Yeah.
if we are in the first year of Farhan Zaidi's tenure, I would not be shocked if Alex Cobb, Jorge Soler, and Luke Jackson are all still on the Giants.
Yeah.
And again, that's not to say the moves are bad per se. Again, I think market wise, they seem like fairly fair value. Look, I don't know how I feel about Soler in the second and third years of that deal, given what we've seen from him this season. And again, DH only players are just really hard to hold, right? Unless they're consistently elite. And despite as good as I was talking Soler up at the start of the segment, but Soler has been inconsistent throughout his career and really is a walk and home run trick pony, despite the weird aberration we've gotten this year with the leadoff hitting. On the buy side, and I say buy with quotations because I think it's more of a vibes buy than an on-field
Yeah.
buy, but nevertheless, Mark Canha is back in the Bay Area. The Giants traded Eric Silva, which was a bit more than I would have anticipated, to acquire Canha. What do you think about that move?
Yeah, welcome back to San Francisco, Austin Slater. I mean, it very clearly, like, this is just the Slater roster spot. The Giants wanted someone who is a right-handed hitter with
Mhm.
a high on-base percentage
Yep.
who can play some outfield for you. And Canha's played first base more recently than Slater has, but Slater has also shown that he can do that in his career. Slater didn't work out this season. Bob Melvin loves Mark Canha. It is simply a one-for-one swap that took 2 weeks. And oh, by the way, you had to throw in Eric Silva, who might have a major league ceiling as a reliever. The one kind of move that I question here is, do they hate Kevin Pillar that much that they wouldn't bring him back? Because the guy's raking with the Angels right now, and he fills the same role for you. Was beloved by a number of guys in the clubhouse, clearly not beloved by the front office. That's why they decided to non-tender him after that 2019 season when he was the Willie Mack Award winner. But if you were ever going to catch lightning in a bottle with someone and have someone go off in the second half of the season and, not necessarily carry a lineup, but be a force for a lineup. You're not going to be a Marco Scudero hitting 362, but maybe you hit 300 with an 800 OPS. Kevin Pillar hasn't been that far from doing that with the Angels. Mark Canha has been pretty far from doing that with the Detroit Tigers. And so it's a deal where it's all a comfort and vibes thing, like you said. Like Scott Harris is the one trading Mark Canha. We all could have predicted the Giants would have bring this guy back to the Bay Area because he's from here. He's played for Bob Melvin. It is clearly the vibes-based move. Does it move the needle for me at all? Not in the slightest. It wouldn't shock me if Mark Canha became the next Scooter Jeanette, was, DFA'd
Yeah.
2, 3 weeks into his
Paul
tenure.
DeYoung. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, all these guys they seem to pick up. They are such low risk moves that the only way I think he stays on the roster with subpar production is if Bob Melvin just simply advocates for that down the second half of the season.
Hmm.
I also think this front office is not in love with Luis Matos. I think that they were hoping they'd get something from Wade Meckler this season. That wasn't going to happen. And so they're in this position where they need some right-handed bat, and this is someone who Bob Melvin trusts. When Bruce Bochy saw that 2019 team and had Connor Joe in left and Michael Reed in right, and was clearly displeased with the hand that he had been dealt in his final season, Farhan conceded and said, "Okay, we'll give you a guy you can stick out there every day who is your type of player
Hmm.
in Kevin Pillar." This is a concession to Bob Melvin, in my
Hmm.
opinion. We will give you someone that you want to put out there, that you're comfortable with, that you have that relationship with. So Mark Canha's in the Bay Area. By the way, I really like Mark Canha as a human being. I think Giants fans will enjoy watching him. I am not particularly bullish on second half production from him.
Yeah, and getting a guy who can't play center field is just like
Wasn't that
again,
the
like
whole deal? Like you're supposed to get a center fielder.
yeah, they got a first baseman. Yeah, no, I'm similarly like again, I understand why it happened, but perplexed to a certain degree from a baseball move. I think, um, I'm not that convinced that Canha is more valuable to you than Slater. Although, granted, if you want to get in the comments and talk about how bad Slater was offensively this year, I won't disagree with you on that front. But from the team perspective, like especially when you went on the air and you're like, yeah, Slater's about young people, young players' opportunities. Like, no, okay, you just wanted to get rid of Slater and you basically turned around and looked for someone else.
Yeah.
And again, that's fine. Like, it's fine to say if you think you can upgrade that spot. I'm just not convinced Canna's that significant an upgrade. And I
If
will
it
say,
was about
I
young
also kind of liked
players,
Silva as a prospect. So I think part of it for me is like, Canna feels like a dude you should be able to sort of PTBNL. I mean, similar to what the Giants, frankly, gave up for, or got for Solaires or Cobbs or whatever. Like Canna doesn't have a big contract, so it's not the full contract dump, but he's also been a below average hitter who's a corner bat who's 35 on an exp. Like there isn't to me the anyway.
well, it should be a guy in return who you only remember because you're like, yeah, the Giants drafted that guy. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be anyone with any sort of a proven performance history in the minor leagues who scouts have written up before, and you're like, hey, he might make the major leagues one day.
Mhm.
And there are someone who surprises you every year, but I guess Eric Silva just was not someone this organization had confidence in because you're not trading anyone you have confidence in for Mark Canha.
Yeah. No, I mean that's a very real point. Um what What is your take on Blake Snell being a San Francisco Giant here on August 2nd?
Teams don't trade top 100 prospects anymore. Teams like to trade high floor guys and guys who will be, major league regulars to
Mhm.
major league fringe guys. They
The
like to trade.
occasional one will overperform, but for the most
Exactly.
part,
They like to trade Austin Slaters when they're coming up.
yeah.
Guys who get to AAA, they're going to be in the big leagues, they're going to have a role, but they're never going to be an all-star. They're never going to be a centerpiece or a core player for you. And all of the players that we saw moved at this year's deadline, and we've really seen moved at deadlines in the last 3 or 4 years that haven't involved trading, a superstar at the big league level. You've been trading high floor guys. And the Giants, as an organization, specialize in high floor guys. They have so many floor guys and no ceiling guys. They have no one on their roster who other teams are game planning around in the lineup on a day to day basis. They have no one on their roster who you say, he's our star for the next 5 seasons. And
Hmm.
so if you were going to get 3 or 4 high floor guys for Blake Snell, the Giants are just filled with them already.
Yep.
So unless someone was going to break the bank, and the San Diego Padres had already traded their, like, you're not getting Ethan Salas for Blake Snell. That's not happening in that type of deal. Everyone else in the Padres organization is a floor guy, not a
Hmm.
ceiling guy right now. And so I find it hard to believe that the Giants actually had an attractive trade offer for Blake Snell. I think it's possible, but because of the contract situation and because of the uncertainty surrounding what he does this offseason, you weren't going to get a ceiling guy. And so I'm fine with him staying in San Francisco.
Yeah, it's I believe the Giants could have got something top 100 prospect adjacent for Carlos Rodon. I'm fairly confident both based on what happened and based on conversations I've had with folks that they probably could have got a little bit of a richer version of what the Phillies gave up to get. Did they get from the Angels? I know they gave up Mickey Moniak. Noah Syndergaard was their
Yeah.
acquisition that year. And basically there was a world where the Giants could have easily gotten that package and perhaps upgraded one of the top pieces. But to a fringe top 100 guy and probably not. And that was a dude who had been dominant for a whole half season. As much as Snell's track record is very good, his track record is also inconsistency. Um, he struck out 15. I was at that start. It was electric to watch him, and
Yeah.
I can understand why another team would wanted him. If I was another team, I'd want him. You're not giving up a top 100 prospect for that, or if you are giving up. There are different, top 100 prospects come in different forms.
They very much do.
You're not giving up the 18-year-old top 100 prospect who has the big tools. If you're giving up the top 100 prospect, you're giving up that guy who's 80 to 100. Who, I mean, honestly, like I remember, like when folks started flipping out about the Kikuchi package, people are like, why didn't the Giants? It's like Jake Bloss is like potentially there's a conversation about him being a top 100 prospect. Again, some people have him in that there, but he's there because he's performed very quickly and because the expectation is if it all fits, it's mid rotation. Now, again, pitching, we're not great at projecting. He could end up being an impact piece, and the Giants look back and regret not making that deal. But I just say that to say, like, the reason the package in the Yusei, the Kikuchi deal was such a big deal is not because of the prospects that came back. It's because of what people's relatively low expectations are for Kikuchi. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
The
Yeah.
Giants get that package for Blake Snell, and the reaction is, okay, yeah, the Giants got a fairly market rate package for a rental of his upside, and Giants fans are probably disappointed because they didn't get an impact guy.
Yeah.
That's just the reality of. I fully agree with you on that front. I tweeted during Snell's start. Um, I want to see what this Giants rotation could do for the last 54 games. And some people had some negative reactions about what and
Shocking.
and it's just I want I want fans, and again, I understand you should care about wins and losses, but think about what is the thing you'd rather watch. Like when I said that, and again, I will say that was not me as saying what the Giants should do from a baseball perspective. That was me saying as a fan, I want to watch a rotation that has potentially two Cy Young winners, one in Logan Webb, who we can put in that category, three potentially tier A starters who with Snell and Webb have recently shown the ability to be to that level. Ray is something close to it. And we'll see, how it goes down the stretch. Hayden Birdsong, Kyle Harrison, these electric young pitchers. At the time, the potential for Alex Cobb in that mix was there, but a bullpen that has Jordan Hicks and Camilo Doval, that has Tyler Rogers and Ryan Walker, like Eric Miller and Randy Rodriguez, like all these dynamic arms. I want to watch that for 50 some odd games.
Yeah.
And while I'm disappointed Cobb isn't going to be in that mix, I am glad that I'm going to get to watch that starting rotation for as many games. And again, that might inhibit the Giants down the road. That might mean, who knows, someone could get hurt. Like all these things could happen. But I am excited to watch that much more than the prospect of the pieces the Giants would get back. Another
Yeah.
thing I will add, and I probably should mention this on the Cobb front, I do wonder if the Alex Cobb trade was perhaps more of a favor than a baseball move. Um,
Yeah.
I There was no one in the Giants clubhouse who it was so clear wanted and wants, and perhaps given his injury history, might only still be playing because he wants to get to the playoffs one more time.
Yeah.
Cobb made the playoffs as a rookie with the Tampa Bay Rays in 2011. He has not pitched in the playoffs since.
That's
Um,
remarkable. What a
he partially chose the Giants because they were coming off the 107 win season when he signed that contract. He, it he was pushing through a hip injury that required surgery and only didn't stop pitching last year, but when the Giants were clearly out of the race.
Yeah.
Um, it I do wonder if either he went to the Giants or the Giants went to him and said, "Look, Alex, we." And he might have said like, "Hey, I'm just letting you know if you are going to sell or if you do want to cut salary, like I, you know, if you could trade me to a team that has a better chance of getting to the playoffs, I'd appreciate it." And obviously the Guardians, they did trade him to the team with the best record in the American League. And so I do want to put that sort of caveat on our conversation in regards to Cobb and these other things. And I think again, if that's a conversation they either had with him or he brought to the front office table or his representation or whatever, like again, I think doing right by players is a thing organizations should do. And I think this could be a form of doing right by Cobb, who is someone who obviously was very good for the Giants for 2 seasons and potentially was prepared to be down the stretch and has pushed through a lot injury wise to do so. So I want to put that out there
Yeah,
as well.
I like that call. I think that that is very much feasible, very much realistic. And you look at the trajectory of Alex Cobb's career. I did not know about that 13-year playoff drought or whatever it's been. It's in
Mm-hmm.
that range. That's that's enticing if
Yeah.
you're Alex Cobb, to have that opportunity to move somewhere when you're starting to feel good and you know that hey, you're on a team where there's no clear spot for you to come back and pitch as a starter would not shock me at all. So I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And as we now look ahead at the Giants who've done this kind of nothing path. Do you have a take on what this means for Farhan Zaidi's future? Again, I mentioned that I thought pretty clearly a full sell-off was the sign that his days were numbered. But what this middle path, what do you have? Do you have a take on that?
Yeah, I think it's actually relatively similar to Gabe Kapler from a season ago. I've been
Ooh.
out of the reporting game for a long time now. I think the last time I had a meaningful conversation with someone about the Giants was spring training 2022. But someone said to me out of the blue last September, late last September, when I was on the radio saying,
Mm.
I don't know if they're going to fire Gabe Kapler, someone came to me and said, no, Gabe's staying. And I have it on good authority that he's staying. And then they called me a week later and was like, hey, you know what? We collapsed and that changed everyone's mind. And we had it. We were told, this is what's happening. And all of a sudden, when the Giants collapsed in the form that they did in September of last year, ownership had to recalibrate and rethink things. And so I think right now, ownership believes that Farhan Zaidi is the guy and will be the guy next season, but could very easily be convinced if the Giants finish with 75, 77, 79 wins, it's time to go another direction. Because when you miss the playoffs 3 times in the expanded postseason era, and when you spend upward of $200 million on a payroll, very few people keep a job like that. Like maybe Brian Cashman has job security like that, but Farhan Zaidi doesn't. And so the 49ers once paid 4 coaches at one time. The Giants can pay 2 presidents of baseball operations and 2 managers at one time. They've done it before. They'll have to do it again. We've seen this around baseball many times. I think it is all predicated on how this team finishes.
Yeah, I think that is very reasonable. And I will say, even about Brian Cashman, Brian tried to win only 81 games for 3 straight years, and we'll see. I don't know about that one. Um, the Yeah, I mean, I don't. I think logically, what I know about baseball, what I know about teams, I agree with you. I am, and I would say personally, I have a similar feeling. I am just very skeptical of Greg Johnson, to be perfectly frank, or just the
Yeah.
the ownership decision making. And I like the thing about managing is you get blamed for streaks.
Yeah.
I don't know if the front office would face the consequences in the same way.
Mhm.
And so like again, I could see a world where it is kind of like they're letting this play out, and if they win 85 games and sneak into the wild card or win 90, or I guess they didn't win 90, but they win 85 or whatever, cool, you keep your job. And like if you're 81, if it's basically 81 wins or less or fewer, you're probably out. I just I don't know. That's a level of patience that billionaires don't tend to have. I think and again, I've interacted with Greg Johnson very casually. I don't have, or I should say, a couple times professionally at press conferences and stuff. I don't have any like insight. This isn't a read of anyone's personality or anything. It's just to say of, if you are feeling that way about someone who is that high up, who is that highly paid, it's kind of like being in a relationship. And if you're doing the math on, well, if I feel good about it in 3 months, I won't end it. It's like, well, it's already over, or at least you probably already should end it.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Giants extended Zaidi, and I realized part of that was performative to not have a lame duck president. Part of that was lining up with Melvin. But the Giants could have told Zaidi, hey, we're not going to go get the manager who's one of the highest paid managers in baseball.
Yeah.
Like the fact that he was able to make his pick of Melvin, the fact that they invested as much as they did this offseason, although to be fair, we don't know, the behind the scenes of free agent signings. Maybe ownership pushed Shum and Zaidi didn't. But I do just feel like I think he might have more leeway than I think a lot of Giants fans would like. I still am a bit more skeptical, because the other thing I'll say is, I do believe ownership had a play in the Kapler firing. I'm not fully convinced that it wasn't like Zaidi wasn't also moved in that. Like I don't I think despite their close relationship in proximity, I think there was a level of, again, Kapler is a personality that's no secret, tends to be enigmatic.
Yeah.
And the reality is just, when you're in an organization that big, a personality like Kapler is going to have many people who are not a fan of him being in a position of leadership. It just is the reality of what the situation does. And so I think what the late season collapse did, on one hand, I think, yeah, there's a way in which we've had multiple late season collapses under Kapler. There's pressure to make a move. I think what it also did was it required a level of validation for the people who had been saying there was a problem here for a while within the organization, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
Where I think that, like, that move, there's a world in which that move was made for the fan base. I don't think that move was made for the fan base. I think that move was made for other coaches, staff members in the organization who had grown frustrated or believed, who were much lower on Kapler than Zaidi himself was. And
Yeah.
Zaidi felt he had to do something to maintain trust in the organization from the people in it, to maintain a level of investment from the people in it. Um, and that to me comes from a place of someone who ultimately, while isn't in a position of great leverage, is also not necessarily on the way out the door. But again, I agree with you. I mean, if it's a full collapse, I think anything is on the table at this point, and we'll definitely see how it plays out. But yeah.
We'll talk about how it plays out. That's for sure.
Yeah, we'll talk about it. And again, I am really stoked to just watch some good pitching. That's what I need, and I stand by. The Giants actually have a league average or above average offense this year. It's just offense and MLB at this point is
Yeah.
mediocrity.
Mediocrity is pervasive.
Yes. And that is Kerry Crowley. I am Mark DeLucchi. Thank you for giving us a watch or a listen on the SF Giants Bayside Talk Show, whatever we name this thing. And we'll try to be back once a week, but we'll definitely be back at some point talking Giants baseball here. Go give us a subscription here on YouTube, and we'll see you later.